In this lesson, I'd like to analyze just the opening few lines from My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, so that we get a good sense of how Browning starts the poem. Now, at this point, the Duke is showing a portrait of his last Duchess to the marriage agent. He wants to get married again, and he's trying to demonstrate by showing this painting how he exerts control, how he knows a lot about art, and he basically tries to both impress and intimidate the man who is listening. One of the things that we see here is that the Duke really controls the conversation. He states all the questions. It's not even clear if those are questions that the marriage agent has asked, but the Duke basically states the questions, puts them in the mouth of the person he's talking to. He interprets the expression on the face of the Duchess in the portrait, and he really acts like an art connoisseur, as if he is somebody who knows how to value artworks, and not just artworks, but also the people in his life. So he's a very intimidating character, somebody who is rather unsettling to be around. As we start off here, he uses the word last for his last Duchess, and this can mean any number of things. It could mean most recent. All right, so most recent, that is certainly one possibility. It could be his final Duchess, whatever that means. Maybe it's some kind of statement about his future wives, whether they will have quality as well. It could also mean least satisfactory. Least satisfactory. In other words, coming last in some kind of list. So none of these meanings is necessarily the preferred one, although I would say most recent is the most likely here. And the ambiguity again is what allows the Duke to kind of impress the person he's talking to and be intimidating. So we can't ever quite figure out what the Duke is saying. It's a little bit of ambiguity, and he uses that to control the situation. Now, we don't quite know if this painting of his last Duchess is a fresco, so directly painted on the wall, or if it is an oil painting. And there's different possibilities here. Different critics have different views. It says here that she looks as if she were alive, and that becomes ominous in view of what happens later in the poem, where the Duke seems to imply that he had her killed, that he gave commands, although as we said in our first lesson, he may have done something less harmful. But it's definitely the case that he has not been kind to his first wife. Fra Pandolf here is the painter. He's the one who painted the portrait. Most likely Fra Pandolf is a monk, and that becomes important for what happens later because the Duke seems to have been quite jealous of his wife. But if Fra Pandolf was a monk who should have been dedicated to celibacy, maybe his jealousy is out of control and is not reasonable. Certainly difficult to say. Now, the Duke calls this painting a wonder, so here he shows that he is a kind of an art connoisseur. He thinks, well, this is a really high-quality work, and yet in the next line he says, Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, which seems to suggest that the whole painting was finished in a day, and that might make us wonder if these two lines are not contradictory. In other words, if it only took him a day to finish the artwork, is it really a wonder? Another thing that's kind of interesting here is that he refers to Fra Pandolf's hands as doing the painting, and that raises the question of agency. In other words, is Fra Pandolf doing the painting or are his hands? Now that might seem like a funny way to address this issue or to ask about the line, but it's almost as if he doesn't want to give credit to Fra Pandolf, and so he separates his hands from Fra Pandolf as if to only give credit to the hands or to turn him into some kind of object. And in fact, this objectification is something that we see throughout the poem. The Duke wants to objectify things, right? Turn them into portraits and paintings statues, those kinds of things, rather than treat them as truly living things. He much prefers people as if they are alive rather than being fully alive, because it's easier to deal with objects, things that don't speak back, than things that are fully alive and in existence. Now, one little word here that's fascinating is the word now, and it's easy to miss this because you could leave the word out, right? The word seems superfluous. Does Browning include it just to complete the line, to have an extra syllable? Or is this typical of the Duke's speech again, the way in which he adds words that provide more meaning, but the meaning isn't entirely clear? Because if we think about this word now, does the Duke mean that the value of the painting, or maybe the value of his first wife, has gone up over time, right? Is that piece a wonder now? Or is he saying that he was less impressed before and now he finds it more of a wonder? Is he also saying perhaps that he is the one who can provide value in the moment, right? At this moment, now suddenly the painting has this incredible value to it. All of these meanings are possible, and the Duke doesn't really spell it out. He's the one in control. We are the ones left guessing in terms of what he means. And as he goes on here then, in the subsequent lines, as he goes on, he again establishes control by not letting the marriage agent speak. So as we read on here, it says, "Will please you sit and look at her," right? He makes the marriage agent sit down. "You listen to me." And then he says, "I said frappandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance," that's the face of the Duke's first wife, "the depth and passion of its earnest glance." His first wife was a very lovely creature who seemed very earnest and sincere, also quite innocent at times. "But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me if they durst," right, if they dared. So the Duke is very well aware that people are afraid of him. "How such a glance came there, so not the first are you to turn and ask thus." There are quite a few things that we can say about this. So as he's talking here, in a sense, he quotes himself, which seems rather egotistic, doesn't it? He's kind of saying, as I have said before, let me quote myself. And then when he talks about saying frappandolf by design, it's like somebody who likes to drop names, right? I know who painted this. I know the painter. But the idea of design also makes us think again about art, because art is by design, and it's as if the Duke is saying, look, my words are full of design. I'm like an artist. I have this sort of control as well. He also shows his control by interrupting himself. So this whole bit between parentheses here isn't really necessary, since none puts by the curtain I've drawn for you but I, right? Does he really need to point out that nobody gets to see the portrait except if they have his permission? Well, he only notes this again to show his power, to say, I'm the one who draws the curtain. I'm the only one who gives access to this particular portrait. And this long, complicated sentence here, the way it twists and turns, he interrupts himself, all of this shows a kind of confidence that he doesn't have to cut to the chase. He doesn't have to speed things up. He can take his time, and the marriage agent just has to sit there and listen, which again is very intimidating. As he says this, we may also wonder whether the marriage agent actually asked this question, right? Did he ask the question about the earnest glance, or is the Duke basically just making this up and putting these words in his mouth? I would suggest that the likelihood here is that the marriage agent didn't ask this. It's as if the Duke is kind of saying, well, this is the question you might have asked, right? It seemed as they would ask me if they durst, if they dared. And the fascinating thing is that when it comes to reading what's on people's minds, a lot of times we can't see what's in their mind. It's as if there's a curtain in front of their intellect, and the Duke acts as if he can draw the curtain on that as well, as if he can see what's in their mind. There's an interesting parallel here in a work by Geoffrey Chaucer. So if you have a chance to read Chaucer's The Clerk's Tale, this is in the Canterbury Tales, very famous work from the 14th century. In The Clerk's Tale, there is another Italian aristocratic figure, a marquis named Walter. And Walter thinks he can tell what his wife Griselda is thinking, or at least he tries. But her blank face always confronts him, and he's incredibly frustrated by the fact that he can't actually fully know what's in her mind. So that teaches an important lesson then about not trying to objectify people, or at least not thinking that somehow we can understand the other person without them also granting access to their mind themselves. As we wrap things up here, as we've made some sense of the opening 13 lines, there's one more thing that I'd like to mention, and that's the fact that at the very beginning of the poem, the Duke used a word that, which we call deictic. So this is sort of a fun fact, not something you necessarily need to remember, but deictic words are words like you, or one, or here. These are words where we need more context, more information to make sense of them. And you can compare that to a word like dandelion, let's say, right? You know what a dandelion is, but the word here, for instance, can mean any number of things. That could be in Paris, it could be on the moon, it could be in a bedroom. It changes all the time. And that's fascinating because the Duke starts with a deictic word to say, look, I'm going to point that thing over there, and this is how he establishes his control, right? He's saying, I'm the one who gives meaning to this. By itself, it is meaningless, but I'm going to point and establish control here. So hopefully you find that interesting, and in the next lesson, we'll continue with the middle portion of the poem.